Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to be talking about a YouTuber's book, his attempt at a Lolita inspired story. And we'll get into how accurate that is of a description. But before we get started, I'm very much looking forward to your guys' thoughts on this whole story. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemwy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creative geniuses, because y'all are insane and talented and skilled in different ways. And the second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover, it'll be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work. I might be your reader, that person might be your reader, that person might be your reader. You're never gonna know until you expose us to what you've been working on. And I want to do my best to spread out the creativity that's out there that I may not be able to read, or I may not be a reader, but somebody is. They are. I know it. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the local library upon request. I hope you're almost as excited as I am for Bodymore Zero coming out this October. You can see this badass in action. Someday soon, I will have a complimentary picture of Ralph to go with that, because Monty is working on the greatest picture of him ever. It's so good. He is so pretty. He's just something special. It's a special book to me, okay? They're special characters to me. I love them so much. With that said, let's jump into the topic of today, which is Heather by G.C. McKay. This is going to be a book review, book walkthrough, book discussion. And I'm actually kind of surprised there are so few book reviews on this book, because it's written by a YouTuber. A couple of years ago, I know that he had more videos on his channel. There are less videos on that channel now. I saw that he has a podcast called Cope and Seethe. And so I'm kind of surprised that this book had such little attention, especially since it's one, a YouTuber book, and then two, it's a pedophile or a predator perspective book. And so you'd think, what with the Onisions out there? You'd think that there would be some sort of attention. Also, I saw how many of you were interested in the Tampa by Alyssa Nutting review, and so I'm very much looking forward to how you guys look at this book, because now we are getting a predator perspective from a male writer and what that will look like. And it's also been compared to Lolita. Now, one thing that I want to go ahead and say from the get-go is this is only the second book out of the 4 that I'm supposed to read for my discussion with Effie Reads Books that I'll be having later this summer about predator stories, and especially stories with predator perspectives. The other 2 that we'll be reading and discussing include My Dark Vanessa and Lolita. I've also grabbed Ian McEwan's lessons from somebody's suggestions on the Tampa video, so I can also have that perspective as well. And so, yeah, these are all going to come up later in a bigger discussion on these sorts of perspectives. These 2 books so far in comparison to Tampa, or even though I've only read 2 books so far that are comparing themselves to Lolita, I'm already sick of it, because it feels like a very cheap way to attempt to elevate the fiction that was written, but it doesn't work because the themes are not the same at all. Well, and so while it's possibly inspired by Lolita, by somebody saying that they want to try their hand at writing a pedophilic POV, I think it's a cheap or dishonest cope when somebody says, it's just like Lolita, it's inspired by Lolita, it was my version of a Lolita, when somebody is actually just trying to write transgressive fiction. Totally a personal opinion on this, but I think it's pretty disgusting for somebody to say, this is just like Lolita, or this is going to be similar to Lolita, when it's just a cover for writing a pedophilic perspective. And I think it's kind of gross that when people want to write transgressive fictions, they lean into specifically pedophilic perspectives, and they don't even try to do it in a reasonably realistic way. They're not trying. They're trying to be disgusting. And you'll see what I mean in this, because if you look at Lolita, there is a level of realism in that story. If you look at Tampa, it takes it to such an extreme that it doesn't meet realism. And it's kind of interesting to me to look at the comments on the Tampa video, with some people saying that she's a realistic depiction, when the author specifically said herself that she was going out of her way to make the character less human, to dehumanize them, to make it so foreign that it is not real. But people will still say, Celeste is clearly a very realistic depiction of this. The author specifically said that she wrote that in a way to make her less real. Meanwhile, in this book, we start getting into some very extreme things. We've also got the underlacing of political commentary throughout, where women are all whores, and you kind of got, and I hate to use the word because I really don't like the political charge behind it or the attention that it brings to somebody's sexual life, because I don't think that it's fair to try to weaponize whether somebody is or is not having sex, but it has a big underpinning of the incel ideology to it. And you'll see what I mean as we go through and I give you some of the quotes throughout. And if you go to the author's channel, he does interact with the incel community and does have readings of Elliot Rodgers' book on his channel. So, like, I'm not insinuating anything about him or how he does it or what his mission statement is, because I haven't watched all of his podcasts, so I don't know. But I think that you run into a very hard line when you're obsessed with writing transgressive fiction and then you also talk about writing a Lolita, because Lolita is transgressive for the subject matter, but it's not specifically trying to be transgressive. But we'll get into that after I tell you about the story. Final thoughts before jumping into the synopsis. I don't think that you can do what Lolita did while purposefully trying to get a reaction out of people. And that's what transgressive fiction specifically tries to do. It tries to go against what society considers the norm. And that feels like a Sam Fenna variant, I'm not gonna lie. A final note, just so everybody knows, that while I believe that all sex between an adult and a minor is rape, I'm gonna be using have sex with in this discussion in order to denotate the willingness of the victim. I'm not saying that it is fine, but I want to denotate that violence was not used in the case of that scene. As is apparently also in true form of books that compare themselves to Lolita, this book also starts off by having the narrator outing himself for who he is and what he is. Tampa also did the same thing. His personality is also very clearly set up as arrogant, full of himself, and a braggart. Quote, "I work in a cafe with children who all think I'm a pedophile. That's the rumor which circled over me right at the end of the day the journey began. It's funny. If you told me before the wings of this rumor took flight, this is where we'd end up, I wouldn't have believed you. Coincidences were once only coincidences to me. Funny and also somewhat sad how distant it all feels, how despite the immaturity of the timeline Heather and I shared, we flocked within the folds of each other's embrace for less than 10 weeks, and the aftermath demanded a further 4 before granting my recovery. And I can hardly claim to being the best of health. But already I fear that I'm getting too far ahead of myself, which I've determined to control as much as my will shall permit. I not only want but need to retrace my steps for the sole purpose of treading back over the footprints of our story, if only to bring it back to life in smudgeable stains of ink across the easily torn, crisp coldness of paper. My key regret is that I am only able to tell this whilst looking back, which is fairly ironic, if not even indicative of Heather and I's fate, if you consider how often I was subject to look over my shoulder during the entire frenzied affair, as you shall soon come to know." So one thing that I already want to point out, because I don't have it in my notes, but it's obviously clear to me since I've made it to the end of this book, when you get to the final chapters of this book, he's standing over another girl who's in a coma and telling her this story. However, this chapter opens as if he's writing it in a journal instead of telling it to that girl who is sleeping. And so then this feels kind of like a retcon, like it forgot that it had done that, or the author wrote it in a way to try to purposefully lie and mislead the reader as to who he was talking to in the beginning, and that's just cheap. This should already be written as if he is talking to somebody laying in a bed when you get to chapter 47 or 48, whenever it is that he's talking to the girl on the bed. It should still show in this, but it doesn't, because it's trying to hide it for some reason. The other thing that you're going to constantly get throughout this is he so much romanticizes how tragic his life is, but he is the one who did this all to himself. But he romanticizes what he has done to himself, and possibly has done it to himself on purpose to romanticize how he is. But the narrative itself romanticizes his position. From the narrative in general, he also gives you the sense that he thinks he is some kind of tragic figure and is actually excited to tell you about his odyssey because it is so special, and he is so special. He continues in peak Redditor fashion, quote, "I suppose your first question would be whether or not my opening statement is true. Like many interpretations, I would venture to say that it would depend entirely on your unique definition. On paper, the vast majority would doubtlessly agree. I, Michael Harlow, am a pedophile. Of that convenient, frivolous label, I'm positive. Though, if we were inclined to be so methodical, I am more of a hebophile as opposed to a pedophile, and barely even one at that, if you'd really like to know." And barely even one at that, if you'd really like to know. I was just chosen to fall in love with a girl. Her age made no mind to me in the least. I'll repeat, it would all depend on your imitable definition. I am frankly a little sick of the implications that a 14-year-old cannot act accordingly of her own free will, is not at liberty to manipulate and coerce and exploit, or is simply incapable of seducing a man 21 years her senior. If my being seduced by a girl in her full bloom of her sexual awakening should christen me a pedophile, though, so be it. We all have to make sense of the world in whatever way that we can, don't we? Again, I'm very annoyed that this is written in this way because from the ending of the book, he is talking to another girl who is in a coma, and a girl who was involved in this, who would know what he is. So this is setting up a completely different tone, number one. Number two, he's pretending that he hasn't preyed on 14-year-old girls before, which he admits that he has before. And it says maybe she was even 13 in a different situation. And he's planning to go after girls again. He also idolizes her innocence and her age specifically, and it constantly highlights their age differences and the fact that she is underage, the fact that it is a crime. So this intro is very, very dishonest to even the feelings of Michael as it goes forward. If this wanted to pretend that it wasn't about age, then it needed to do different things with the future narrative. But the future narrative all feels like it's done on purpose in a way, but the future narrative is done in what feels like on purpose in order to get your goat, in order to pull a reaction out of you because of how much he idolizes and fetishizes the predatory relationship. So having finished this book, I freaking hate the intro of this too because it is so insanely dishonest, and it doesn't even feel like it's Michael being dishonest because this is just a completely different character. This feels actually like a bait and switch where it's trying to be like, look, this is so much different than what you think it's going to be. And then it's not. Also, this is one of its allusions to how it's supposed to be like Lolita, because Humbert is doing a confession basically at the beginning of Lolita for the situation that he went through, but this is not at all comparable. The chapter then finishes with, quote, "However, I am not speaking before a judge and jury, not now or yet anyway. This one-way discussion or confessional, worded shrine, or what some have even called a screed perhaps, is strictly between you and me. And though you are unable to answer or interject, do not think that your watchful eyes, though docile and most likely dumb, if not lifeless, are not in their own way complicit. My retelling in and of itself is your participation, so long as you listen to me in the ways that I imagine you will. Do not pretend the blindfold covering your mind's eye found its way here alone. For what use is a story condemned to the playground of one person's mind?" This entire first chapter gets you off on the wrong foot immediately, which, again, like you're going in with a predator's perspective in general. I get it. He's full of actuallys, and I get that he's trying to defend himself fruitlessly, but no, dude, you're the adult here. It's not up to a teenage girl to be the one in control. You're the one in control. But again, this sort of goes back into the mindset of that he's using with the incels, where it's all women are wrong, all women are whores, all women are just trying to manipulate you. And one of his more recent videos that I watched to try to get more perspective on possibly who this character is or why he wrote it the way he did is a video that he posted called "All Men Are Incels." And in that video, he says that you should treat thoughts as if they are not human. Dehumanize the heck out of all thoughts because they are just psychopaths that are going to try to suck you dry for money. Meanwhile, in that same video, he also says that this day and age, it's difficult to find any actual woman. So the implication between those two lines is that most women are thoughts and that you should dehumanize most women because they're all manipulative. And what you'll see in this book is that exact same mindset. So then it starts getting into like how much of this is the author's perspective versus how much of this is Michael representing this thing. That's where it starts getting confusing. But I've also seen other people blame children for the seduction. And guess what? I understand if you are a predator, if you're a bad person, blaming the victims of your crimes for your actions. But Michael is just a pathetic worm. He is so pathetic. Throughout this entire thing, he acts like he does not have autonomy, that he is entirely controlled by women. And again, in that same video of why all men are incels, that video says that all men are beholden to the pussy and that men don't have control because women are constantly just lifted up and get whatever they want, all resources thrown at them and worshipped like goddesses because of the pussy, and men can't help themselves. The passages I shared are pretty much the entire first chapter, which is obviously him excusing what he did immediately while pretending to be intelligent and a victim, and a tragic figure that he wants you to remember. Next, he says that his parents died in a car crash, but that's all the story that you're going to get because history doesn't matter. He immediately dismisses anything and everything that happens to us as being irrelevant to who we become. Again, overly intellectual and also playing in the same camp as Sam Finna's "we're all just animals" argument of nature. This also feels kind of like a reactionary response to the sort of people that say they want to understand the whys of criminality in order to get ahead of the crimes next time or try to prevent them. Whereas other people think that it's all just nature, you can't prevent it, you are just who you are with no free will, and that's just how it is. Michael also says he doesn't want to make any excuses for why he was into Heather, which, fine, sir, you're just a predator and proud. That's fine for you. And then he says he is excited to tell you the story of him and his child lover. You'll also find that we actually have no idea what happened to his family because later he admits that he just lies about his family in general for whatever is expedient for the situation. He now rants about how crows will eat everything, not just the freshly dead, and how he prefers that kind of honesty that crows have and that they'll talk to each other about whether or not to trust humans that are around them. He then says that crows practice necrophilia. He just likes crows and wanted to share, so here we are. That's supposed to be some sort of really heavy-handed foreshadowing for his necrophilia that he's going to do later and also his eating of bodies later. I'm just too dumb to get this, I will admit. After the intro, he introduces us to the workplace where this all started, and that he wouldn't have known that people were calling him a pedo if not for some guy that he used to work with named Joseph. Also, all of his other coworkers are females and horrible. He repeats in this section how he won't lie, and that none of what he's about to say is a lie, so that you should definitely trust him, because if he lied, then all of his words would be meaningless. He says that he's embarrassed to be 30-something and a barista. He works at a bookstore that's not really a bookstore, because he thinks that all of the books there are too freaking mainstream and poorly written and basically just popcorn books and not smart enough. But, you know, they're selling Lolita, so, like, what does he want? When the rumors about Michael being a pedophile started going around, Joseph brought it to Michael's attention. Michael is offended by Joseph saying that he's a pedophile as well without asking for his age or the circumstances in which he was dating a girl underage. He says that he was 18 at the time and the girl was 14, but she said that she was legal, and I'm now feeling like the author is making excuses for himself already. He says that he was 18 and the girl was 14 and said that she was legal. And this specific moment in the book feels very different. And I'll tell you why. At the very beginning of the book, there is this acknowledgement / devotion that says, "To the girl who introduced herself as, 'Hi, I'm legal.'" There is no way that you look at a 14-year-old and think that she's legal, my guy. So how this rumor started going around was that he apparently told a coworker named Serafina about dating a 14-year-old, which is so random to do. And he says, "I don't know, bro. I had a 21-year-old friend at the time who was also dating a 14-year-old and no one cared." If that's the situation that you're in, I would question the friends groups. But it's also apparent throughout this book that nobody really cares about the underage dating thing, because at this point, I don't know why Serafina and them were not trying to get him fired because of even just the rumors. Even when they have confirmation later, they don't try to get him fired. Then Joseph goes on about how he was dating some chick and they were having mad sex, but she was also insane, so he broke it off in 6 weeks, though she threatened to press sexual assault charges if he did cut her off. The narrator, Michael, then says that he's taking a break from whammon for a reason. You'll see this as a constant where it's, if the guys don't do what the women want, then it's always a threat of pressing sexual assault charges. This comes up later with one of the co-workers who also goes, "Now do what I say or else I'm going to say that you assaulted me," which again falls in line with certain political perspectives. Quote, "All right, but wouldn't you say that it's fashionable to throw allegations around these days? Most of the guys that I know of have been accused of foul play. You can't tell me that's just a coincidence. I mean, maybe it is a coincidence. You dated you had a friend who was a 21-year-old dating a 14-year-old. I'm not trying to take the side of false allegations over here, but also, like, my guy, you might also just not have good friends. Can't put that out the window, right?" He says relationships are fucked and all that he can think about is killing himself. At this point, I was already like, I really hope this character is not a self-insert. Joseph finishes his last day at this job, says goodbye, and alludes to who is saying that Michael is a pedophile and spreading that around. It's not Serafina, but the rumor did come from Serafina. Michael is then trying to cover Michael is then trying to cover the fact that he said that he had been with a 14-year-old by saying that maybe she was 16, though he also goes, maybe she was a well-developed 13. Who knows? But he says that he also only told his coworkers that he did that, hoping that they would leave him alone. Look, maybe if you hate your coworkers so much that you want to be left alone, the better choice is to quit your job and go find a different job than to tell them that you've been with a minor to hope that they will leave you alone. Because yeah, I'm sure that they'll leave you alone, but also it's because you're going to be in jail. Then he reaches for more sympathy. Quote, since I stated that I would not dwell on my past, I'll forego much detail, but my reasons for opting out of society were only being strengthened and regrettably enforced by my employment in that cafe. Couple that with the suicidal ideations of my thoughts, and I think that you'll understand where I was coming from. The world that I'd returned to after only a handful of years out there was even uglier and more unpalatable than the one that I'd left behind. The girls working there simply hated men. They'd say it openly, freely, of any ramifications, all while hugging each other, encouraging unwarranted outbursts of tears over incidents that barely even touched upon the trivial. Their behavior was often preposterous, and yet nobody ever blinked an eye over it. For some reason as well, everything, and I mean everything, had to begin and end with a hug. If you dared breathe a bad word regarding their sex, however, you were not only scolded for it, but labeled accordingly. Before I provided them with ample excuses to loathe me and stamp me as a pedophile, I'd already been called a misogynist, psychopath, homosexual, drunkard, and pig. Oh, and a flirt. I was an outrageous flirt as well, apparently. Whilst being all of the above, I supposedly cared about nothing more than some lewd verbal exchange with the opposite sex, to be taken at every opportunity. I see your wink wink and I raise you an oink oink. They were all in or around their early 20s though, so I shouldn't have really expected anything less. But the venom of their hatred seemed uncalled for, righteous to a point of radicalism, and they saw themselves as socialists and liberals. Frankly, I found the blindness of their own fascism quite terrifying. The only way to be liked in this group, this collective, the Dungaree Club, was to pander to their ever-escalating bullshit. That's why I implore you to understand. I chose to be hated, chose it, because if I came to be seen as a threat, my desired solitude, I'd hoped, would be achieved. Again, unfortunately, I came to find myself mistaken. Initially, that is. At ease, interruptive foreplay. You'll find as we go forward that Mike believes it is better to be a pedophile than a feminist. That's a hot take. There's also something in the way that he describes his interactions with these girls that it feels like he is definitely being a creep, but he doesn't see himself as being a creep. Michael out here flexing his biggest victim award, and at this point, I'm sure he is just lying to the reader when he says that he doesn't lie. That's also what Humbert did, but this is so ridiculous that it's not even funny how obviously he is a creep. And like in his description of how he interacted with those girls or how those girls interacted with him, it really just feels like he was a creep and he's thinking or pretending or assumes that he's not. Kind of like, you know, you walked up to him and been like, so, can I sniff your panties? And they're like, what the frick, you freak? Back it up. And he's like, feminism. What the frick is wrong with feminists? That's the vibe I get from Michael. He then talks about how his coworker Serafina is super hot and has an air about her that makes him want to trust her. And he figured that's why he told her about the 14-year-old situation, which I thought he told her about the 14-year-old because he wanted to be left alone and seen as dangerous, which means he wanted that rumor to propagate. He asks Serafina about her little sister Freda, pretending he doesn't know who she is, but he knows full well who she is. He is told that she is a lesbian, BT dubs, so he better not make any moves on her. Quote, I hummed, looking beyond Serafina to see if my impression of Freda had altered in the light of this information. It hadn't. She may have been 14, but her body and demeanor still very much represented that of a child, sexless. But maybe if I saw her naked, I'd change my mind. He says he doesn't want to get any more involved with Serafina, but is ignoring her backfires against him. Then he's noticing how all of the girls around him appear as if they're dressed the same in dungarees. He says their choice of clothing makes these schoolgirls look like adults. This guy just hates women his age. Let's be real. So then he sees women his age, or not even his age because they're in their early 20s, but he sees younger women as unattractive and then sees children as adults. As attractive, as sophisticated. After the rumor is spread around, he says that he gets more attention from Serafina. She even flirted with him, unlike before. Quote, even the sexual chemistry between us seemed to awaken a childlike element of my own personality that I long thought of as dead. At my age, being around little women was confusing. And because of this, he's checking out the 18-year-old Serafina. Quote, she had the mammary glands of all the children of the Dungaree Club combined, and then some. Marvelous they were. Serafina then walks away to do something, and that's when he sees Heather and is immediately smitten. Quote, yet the learning too was there, impregnating the arm's reach of space between us. She knew it and I knew it. Sometimes certain people give off a certain vibe. Sometimes it's the knowing of the inevitable heartache, the rotten misery of the human heart and its demonic desire to hurt and damage others for the sake of destruction alone, as if in homage of our own equal and unstoppable demise. I wanted to love her without condition, bereft of any and all hope. I knew that from the very first moment I saw her that I'd never felt so scared of my own sexuality. It was as if I was now haunted by a desire I never knew that I possessed. Which he went after a 14-year-old before. He's checking out 14-year-olds all the time, including Freya. So, like, I don't understand where this is coming from. If he wants to pretend that this was like a one-time thing, then the book did not do a good job of making this a surprise. Because Michael makes it look like it's not only normal, he's not surprised by himself, but he's turned on by the fact that he is into this situation and he wants more of it, and he romanticizes himself for being in this situation because he's like, how tragic am I? Oh, the world is against me. Heather and her family then approach the register and order while Michael undresses Heather with his eyes. Michael openly flirts with Heather over the extra hot chocolate milk that she's ordered and asks her if she wants cream. Then is later excused by Serafina because he's about to cream himself. So she's like, maybe you should go and take a break, huh? Meanwhile, Michael is like, you know what? Yeah, I should. As he watches Serafina put the cream on that hot chocolate and it explodes on her arm because it's empty, and he's like, it's like an orgasm. With that thought in his mind, he scurries off to the bathroom to go and take care of himself, but he's a little too paranoid that people might know, so he may not touch himself. Quote, I suppose the paranoia of my fantasies was born out of the notion that I shouldn't have been having such fantasies at all. Though I knew this at the bottom of my core, my mind ran so far away from me that I was simply unable to keep up. Somehow, Heather was already inside of the bathroom with me. I kept seeing the teal cotton heads of her skin-tight 11 to 13 size t-shirt that exposed her exceedingly stout midriff, the pert, ever-budding breasts underneath, and overall, I could feel what it would be like to lay my fingertips upon her pristine skin and taste the emanating effervescence of her pores. But most of all, most deadly of it all, it was the manner in which she looked at me that caused such sickly sweet lick of sweat to fall between the crack of my buttocks, what made such delirium of my perineum, and the ever-pulsating convulsion shiver of my shaft. He leaves the bathroom without having touched himself because of his paranoia and gets back to work where he stares at Heather. Quote, her brow did, however, contort as I slid yet another glaze-coated donut between my lips, washing it down with a large tropical-flavored caffeine-rich energy drink. Heather was still in the room. I didn't even need to glance over to know that. When I found myself unable to keep my want at bay, I'd look at her even before realizing what I was even doing. She sat upright, so stiff and arrested by her own impossible vibrancy, erected by her need to be noticed at all costs, for a nature she most likely wouldn't ever really understand. I kept trying to imagine that my very imaginings were exactly just that. Imaginings and nothing more. She couldn't have been looking at me through her sidelong glances as much as I was telling myself, and more, screaming at myself. Surely her stiffened, rigid, yet flexible, tight, upright, and utterly ladylike position couldn't have been intended for only my sole observation. She was a girl, just a girl discovering her body's sudden invasion of all things sex, with an outright demand to be touched and caressed and squeezed and penetrated and fucked and tasted and made to sweat and tremble and explode and secrete the most severe and perfect juices and bleed the translucency of her life all over the tip of my deadened tongue to gush. And just like that, Serafina interrupts his fantasizing at the table and denies the gravity of Michael's aching scrotum, which is actually in the words, by the way. Then Serafina asks to leave early to go to a dress rehearsal for her sister Freya. Michael then realizes that this is the only reason why his coworker has not dogged on him for openly lusting after a child. She wanted to ask him for a favor, so she's letting him get away with it. Again, this could very likely just be the narrator mislabeling what Serafina knows and what she doesn't actually knows, but as we go further along, like, Serafina knows. She knows, and this story just confirms that nobody cares about the predator in this story. And it's a weird and not good juxtaposition in the story where there is like literally zero consequence to anybody finding out that he is going after a child, that it makes Serafina not special in her covering for him to let him get away with it, to help him get away with it, because for some reason she's also into it. But then it also goes into, again, another thing that the author said in his video, Why All Men Are Incels, where he states that women are constantly in competition with one another, and when you have the attention of one woman, then it makes all other women be jealous and want to compete with each other for your attention. So the fact that Heather wants him makes the other women also want him, instead of them seeing like, oh, it's a 14-year-old. Anyway, they decide to close early, which you'll find is a common theme in this. Apparently, they don't have to do full work days. They just close whenever they want. Michael is miserably waiting out the day, but at least he's not horny anymore. Then Heather comes up and asks about toilet paper for the bathroom. Michael doesn't like to think about the customers pooping because it's gross, so he never really fixes up the bathroom. He doesn't clean the bathroom. He doesn't put toilet paper in the bathroom. Then they go on talking, and she asks about the book that he put up on the recommended reads, which is Lolita, by the way. If you thought that it was being heavy-handed, don't worry about it, it's heavy-handed. This is what he has to say about Lolita. Quote, "Some say that it's the greatest love story of the 20th century. They're wrong, but reading it for the first time is pure seduction. It's the only novel that I've read where the unreliability of the narrator is trounced by the increasingly undependability of its reader." They smirk at each other as he says that she should read it sometime. He's surprised that they both remember each other's names, and then her parents come and collect her. Once she's away and he's left the shop alone, he realizes that he's got wet shorts from pre-cum, and he feels frightened and paranoid. That's the camera behind him sees that, which means somebody is going to find out that he was shooting his load while talking to a child. He's lamenting work the next day about how people are complaining about the bathroom, and he says, "Screw the bourgeoisie." Quote, "I never wished death upon so many people in such a short amount of time," as they just ask for the status of the bathroom and why it's a mess and why there's no toilet paper. Heather hasn't come back, and he's annoyed by all of his coworkers, especially Madeline. Quote, "And aside from my occasional brush with the overly alpha leader of the work infants, Madeline, who signals her desire to see my testicles at the mercy of a guillotine via her body language alone, I spent most of the week once again working alongside Serafina. During this time working with Sarah, he spends a lot of that time making excuses to touch her as they're working together, and he notices that she's become very subservient to the other girls. He asks Sarah if she's seen Heather, and she says no. It lists a few books that they had on display, which includes The Story of the Eye and 120 Days of Sodom, and the manager, Rosalind, took those away because they were too inappropriate to put on the recommended readers list. He then laments how dare she take those books off of the rack for inappropriateness when he's seen inappropriateness on her Instagram. Look, dude, these are two different situations. It's not hypocrisy, just... And I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that anything that she's put on Instagram is not as spicy as, you know, putting a bull's testicle up your vagina, or the, what is it, 20 plus murders and the 300 pages of coprophilia that's in 120 Days of Sodom. I'm going to assume that Madeline's Instagram is not that spicy. But, you know, you do you, buddy. You do freaking you. Moving on, he asks if she wants to grab a drink, and she says yes, so they can close down early again. He just wants to manipulate her, though. Quote, "Admittedly, the only appealing thing about Sarah were her looks and, well, let's face it, those spectacular tits. The capriciousness of her personality had waved more red flags than a deathly favorite pastime of a Hemingway afternoon. But making out I was romantically interested in her, when really I was vastly indifferent, seemed to be just the medicine needed." Then when he leaves with Sarah, he's actually fantasizing outright about being Humbert to Heather's Lolita. Sarah and Michael then go out for drinks. Michael believes that Sarah might have lost her virginity as a child. She notates that all he does is watch the children at work. And again, somehow we're not reporting this to anybody. Sarah then asks his age, and he has a bit of an existential crisis. Quote, "As I finish my drink, eyeing Seraphina's to see it was only half empty, the sudden possibility that I hadn't grown up at all hit me hard. I tried to be a caring parent to myself and failed so miserably that I'd come to agree with my own parents' emotional withdrawal from me. All the questions only ever laid to the variation of one. What on earth am I doing here to what am I doing here on earth? My social standing was destitute, family non-existent, career a factotum joke. I was a walking nothing, an inconsequential shadow. And, to put it simply, and rehash a phrase popularized by my surrounding youth, I really had no fucks left to give, which, when you think about it, made me an extremely dangerous man." Then when Serafina asks if he has a phone number, he says, nope, no phone number. Social media is the bane of existence, and everyone who does is more vulnerable to depression, mental illness, suicide, narcissism, and psychopathy. Not to mention being followed everywhere they go. I'd rather not get involved, thank you very much. He gives her a fake phone number that he used to have some years ago, and then she gives him her card to go buy some drinks while she goes to the bathroom. Michael is really feeling himself now because this woman who'd been going around calling him a pedophile was now super into him and even buying him drinks. He wants to do this to play her brother role until he gets old enough to play her father role, and he can get close enough to Freya and Heather using Serafina as a cover. Sarah comes back from the bathroom and gets on the phone. Eventually, she breaks off the night saying that she has to leave and exits quickly. He's sure that the other girls at work are the reasons behind her leaving, calling an emergency meeting that Serafina has to go to. The next day at work, everyone is awkward and not talking to him, and he goes into a diatribe, quote, "The truth of a collective is never revealed by the spoken word. Only the silence that shields their secrets unveils all. I had a mind to walk out of there and then. Under this tyrannical, gynocentric annihilation of my character, the urge to release the fury of my masculine resolve, toxic, if not fatally poisonous, as it may have indeed provided to be, caused every fiber of my being to shake with violence I had not known myself capable of before. All this without the uttered breath of a single word." They're stonewalling him because they think he's a pedophile, but they're not reporting him or firing him because Rosalind should be able to get rid of him if they are all this level of uncomfortable. And they have video camera evidence of him staring at little girls at work. The story just doesn't work because he's not even subtle, like everybody knows, which is the biggest issue that this story really has at being believable. Michael continues insulting all of the people that he's working with and says that only reason that they dislike him is because they're feminists who hate men. The sound of broken milk frother is making him want to die again, and Madeline says that she is going on break. Quote, "This cunt in front of me, as I suspected within minutes of first meeting her, was nothing but a bully riding the feminist freight train so long that it stuck to the tracks of her own solipsistic agenda." Sarah stays with Michael and they keep working. He asks her about last night, knowing that she went to meet with the other girls and Joseph, and being mad at them for leaving him behind. Later, Madeline tells Michael to leave Sarah alone. And not even a joke, the book says that Sarah can't be a proper feminist if she's dating a pedophile. So he needs to back off. So yeah, this book is setting up the dichotomy that you can either be a feminist or a pedophile, and it's better to be a pedophile than a feminist. That's what I get from this, because we're going to get another guy named Harry in here who is apparently a male feminist, but is actually just using the male feminist line to be predatory on women. So, like, Maddie then says if Michael doesn't back off, she'll then accuse him of assault and then leaves work. Michael goes to ask Sarah about her little sister, Freya, and she lets loose on him that it's not okay to make sexual comments about her 14-year-old sister, and it's not okay to talk to your coworkers about hitting on underage girls, porn, or killing yourself, which, not incorrect. There are certain things you're not supposed to say or talk about at work, especially if your coworkers are like, no. But again, why does he still have a job? This is the kind of thing that gets you fired. Michael then takes offense to Serafina stating boundaries and says, you can either joke about everything or nothing, which, true, fine, whatever, but that doesn't mean that you can necessarily say that to your coworkers at work. Venue does matter. I don't know what the labor laws are in UK though, so I don't know if that's actually okay in the UK, but like usually if somebody's like, don't talk to me about that thing, that is not clamping down on your free speech. It's just somebody doesn't want to talk about that thing, and it is disrespectful to continue talking about those things, especially such aggressive things. Michael determines that because of this outburst, it's clear that Sarah is basically a non-entity and has been conformed by Madeline and should be treated as if she is not sentient, which goes into the video that the author did saying that women are basically NPCs, you should dehumanize them, you should not treat them as if they're people, because they're not. He then takes out the trash, hoping that he dies, and thinks about how all women definitely come from hell. He leaves out the back door of the bookshop at the end of the day and runs into Heather. Serafina follows out the back door looking for Michael. Michael grabs Heather and hides under some stairs. She tells Michael that she's enjoying the sordid yet sweet tale of Lolita. Then she tells Michael that she doesn't think that he's a pedophile and says that people take labels a lot more seriously as they get older for some reason. She stands there waiting for him to lean in, and then they start making out. Quote, "My fate was sealed as she took my other hand and placed it to the side of her breast, trembling with thunderous ecstasy. Here, I will stress that I did somehow manage to control my urges, despite the rage of lust seething out inside of my loins. I merely fondled her frame as we continued the so-called crime of our fatal first kiss." He says that he realizes that he only has today to live for, but also now that he's done that with Heather, she has all of the power over him to obliterate his life if she wants to, and he needs to keep her from realizing it. Sarah tries talking to him. He shrugs Serafina off and thinks about how he's both so attracted to Heather and also in such danger by being interested in her. Then Heather comes in wearing a schoolgirl uniform that he calls super sexualized. Heather approaches, greeting him sensually, and he's worried about the sexual tension being noticed by Sarah. Heather orders Michael's favorite kind of coffee to make, and he is jizzing himself as he prepares the beverage for the first time in weeks and insults Sarah as a narcissistic slut for thinking that he might be making a coffee and using the coffee machine, at his job where he's a barista. He's like, that narcissistic slut bitch over there thinks that I'm doing it for her to help her at work. Psst, no, this is me flirting with a 14-year-old. I can't believe that narcissistic bitch thinks I'm doing my job. He further insults Sarah because Sarah's asking questions about Heather, and then he runs the coffee over to Heather. When he's talking to her, he tells her to get out Lolita and read it so that people think she's actually doing something like homework. She says that she's done reading it so she doesn't need to pull it out, and then he's like, fine, then pick up some book like other girls your age, like Harry Potter or Twilight or something. And Heather is like, I'm not like other girls, okay? I don't read books like that. Don't you know that? He tells her to go home soon because he's getting way too aroused and his coworkers are watching, and she's like, okay, I'll go eventually, but I'm just an itsy little girl with this big hard crush on you. Then this is straight out of Haunting Adeline, she starts sensually drinking the coffee while staring desperately at Michael. Quote, after a moment, Heather brought the coffee cup to her lips and sucked in the liquid of black with an audible sip. My admiration of her in that moment was enough to make me sick. I felt the rage of a parent with an uncontrollable teen. Indicating this as best I could under the circumstances, I spun on my hoof and walked briskly back to the counter with a decidedly convenient lick of sweat across my brow. Whew, I said to Serafina, who was looking at me somewhat less than impressed. It's pretty damn hot in here, don't you think? He goes back. Serafina points out how Heather is watching him, and Michael attempts to deflect by saying Heather is definitely a lesbian, though, and then excusing himself to go on his lunch break. He is delighted and flattered that Heather has come to see him, and he says that he's already decided to lose at this game of, being a predator. I mean, obviously, a 14-year-old is pursuing him, and it's all he's ever wanted, so how could he be anything but the victim? He's obsessed with a number 14 now, feeling alive, obsessed with Heather, and worried that Sarah is going to notice. He's so worried about Sarah that he's thinking how much easier it would be if he just raped her, and that's less dangerous than her finding out that he is into Heather. He claims that the women he works with not liking him predatoring on children is part of some fat, woke feminazi agenda against him, and if he keeps hitting on one of those girls at work, then maybe. And if he keeps hitting on one of the girls at work, then maybe the others will be so distracted by that he can slip in with his lust on Heather because it'll throw him off his tracks. He also determines that if he can make them hate him enough, they won't think about him, and then he can get away with the things that he wants. Quote, one day you'll see that great evil can only be executed by those possessed with the utmost empathy. I, Michael Harlow, had to sacrifice myself in order to protect what Heather and I were fated to become. Exposing the sensibilities of the other girls surrounding me would send them cowering back into the safe space cocoons in which they came. What those dumb whores didn't realize is that they perpetuated the very evils capable of mankind by choosing not to confront them in the first place. Smearing my own name, becoming the most colossal creep they'd ever known, would put me into a realm of the shunned and the consequently unseen. For man knows of no greater punishment than that of exile. I would escape the stains of suspicion so long as the collective detested me with the utmost disdain. By banishing myself by my own hand, I could infiltrate their imaginations and take shelter in the recesses unknown that I could hide somewhere between the ghost lines of their shared cognitive dissonance. I planned on making myself so hideous to their self-righteous ideologies that I'd be free to fly about as if I were a phantom, lurking amongst the thoughts that they wouldn't dare even think, let alone shed light upon. And again, he's saying he wants to be as disgusting as possible in order for them to ignore him, but I don't understand how this would not result in him being fired. It also turns out that Freya and Heather are actually friends, both as 14-year-olds, and they are now at the bookstore. Sarah's not condemning Michael for creeping on Heather and is actually giggling, quote, "You have competition now." He gets mad at her for making that joke, since she was mad at him for saying that it was a problem when he was creeping on Heather. But apparently now it's totally fine since she's making jokes. But now it's apparently super fine since Heather is making jokes. Sarah then joins the other girls over where they're sitting in the reading area, and Michael acts awkward in the coffee shop, knocking stuff over as the girls kind of laugh and giggle to each other. He's watching the girls, imagining that they're horny and flooding their panties before hard segueing into an episode of Simpson with a heavy-handed attempt at foreshadowing to prepare the blaming of Michael for what Heather will do later, where it's, no one will ever believe that the good girl Reverend daughter did the bad thing when bad boy Bart will take all of the blame. Also, this section is introduced as saying, you probably won't know The Simpsons. It's before your time, while it's still on the air. Sarah interrupts his Simpsons recap and he insults her by saying, quote, in a tone straight out of a millennial handbook for why everyone should hate millennials. Michael tries to lead Sarah into, we're not in control of our lives. Quote, oh, Jesus, Michael, talk about depressing. Doesn't being so pessimistic get tiring sometimes? Doesn't feigning positivity, in fact, make you miserable, Serafina? She plucked her lips open to respond. But as our eyes met, something stopped her. There was even a tiny dome of a bubble on the tip of her tongue, which popped under the echo of her silence. The worst part is when you realize how little choice you had over everything. It snaps you into a state of paralysis. We're each only one person away from having our entire identity shattered to pieces. This specifically is enough to get Serafina to be hot, bothered, and submissive because clearly she was traumatized as a child. And so then Michael goes in for a kiss. She stops him and says, we can't do this here. Let's close the shop, go and get some drinks, maybe make out a little bit. It's at this point that I'm like, they're closing shop early every single day. Again, how is Rosalind not just firing everybody or writing everybody up for not freaking doing their jobs? Serafina and Michael then bounce for drinks and on the way run into Heather, who is crying, so Serafina takes Heather home and leaves Michael alone. He's like, oops, I forgot to tell Heather about how Sarah is going to be used for our cover. Now she's going to think that I'm cheating on her. Fuck. At work, they're down a person as Madeline isn't helping. The girls are all over there talking to each other as usual, and Michael goes on about how he hates women again, saying that they're all faking things to stand around and chat. He assumes that they're all trying to corrupt Heather into their feminazi agenda. Quote, Rosalind then took out the tray and walked over to the girls, delivering another round of free drinks as a ruse to stand about and chat. I'd never witnessed such absurd behaviors in a workplace before, but apparently I was the only one who saw it. The girls just did whatever they wanted, using their tampons as nunchucks against logic and reason. Ladies' issues, please. Notice how even their biological conditioning falls into the endless litany of their victimhood. And now the Dungaree Club had got a hold of my Heather and was trying to colt fuck her into believing their gynocentric drivel. I couldn't help but view the whole scene as a conspiracy against Michael Harlow, and yet all was calm. Heads hadn't turned yet. No eyes darted my way. I was either being ignored or I'd already been forgotten. I should have felt relieved by what I saw before me, for if Heather had spoken up, there was no way in hell the girls would have been sat there. It physically hurt to have her so near yet so far. Even more so to see now that she couldn't even bear to look at me, peripheral or no peripheral. Maddie's not boyfriend. Harry comes in. He's 6 years younger than her and they met on Tinder and he's a pretty boy. Quote, the Dungaree Club had itself a little pet cuck. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Harry must have had the intelligence and personality of a sponge. He clearly had no clue of his own sexual marketplace value. Whilst Madeline was far from ugly, even sort of cute on occasion until she spoke, there was nothing feminine about her in the least. Hence her supposed feminism, come to think of it. Something didn't make sense. For a while, I honestly thought Harry must have been retarded. Clearly, Michael is jealous of Harry, but nah. The book says that Harry is also a pervert trying to sniff Heather's panties. He's just playing the good boy thing to get closer to the youngsters. I guess at this point, we've got all men are predators and all women are whores. That's the outlook of this book. Still, Michael wants to murder everyone since he hates his job. Sarah talks to Michael about the night that she took Heather home and says, yeah, she has a big fat crush on you. So maybe don't get involved. Maybe don't get involved because I don't want anyone getting hurt. Michael says that Maddie is me-tooing him with her eyes. Michael then complains that Maddie is me-tooing him with her eyes. Apparently, he is the most desired man now because a 14-year-old wants her. And when one woman wants a man, then every woman wants that man. He asks her to go out for a drink and she says no, and that his behavior is not okay. He's acting like an incel who hates women. He yawns, bored of the conversation, and she says, quote, oh, and stop talking about Heather, and don't pretend that you don't know her name. You're way too inappropriate with her, so just back off, all right, Michael? Stop your flirting. You're giving her the completely wrong idea. Anything else? I asked, clapping 2 cups together. Why don't you me too me whilst you're at it? Or has Madeline got first dibs on that threat? Again, asking why they haven't fired him. Again, asking how they're putting up with this when they know that he's flirting with 14-year-olds, when they tell him to not go after children. And he's like, oh, are you going to say that I am raped somebody? My guy, you are openly bragging about predatory behavior on a child. You know, I can accept that maybe this whole direction of this story is trying to make a mockery of the type of person that Michael is, that doesn't believe in sexual assault, that believes that you should get girls as young as possible before they are ruined by the feminists around them. Maybe this is mocking the guys that think that feminists are the enemies and that everybody who doesn't want to bang them or is a feminist is just a fat, ugly person. Like, maybe it's trying to paint somebody like this, but then you go and you watch some of the author's videos where he agrees with what Michael is saying, and you're like,
why are we still here? Just to suffer every night.
Sarah walks away from that conversation, and Michael feels like now, life is now. He wants all the intimacy he can get with Heather and wants it right the frick now. So he realizes that something must be done about himself in order to not take her if he's going to not take her. But no, he wants to take her. So he reasons with himself, quote, I spent the rest of the day and morning, not just for myself, but with the purest sympathy for every actual pedophile out there with the strength not to act on their impulses, locked in a lifelong burden of desires never to be realized, a prison cell designed out of instincts that you never chose, of which you're always holding the key, for I could not think of a crueler degree of torture. Can you? Considering that I have read, which was the study that Alan Walker did on pedophiles, so you can find the review of that on this channel. Considering I've read that and I've looked at papers from these sorts of interviews, yeah, that's what these people really think. Instead of, I should fix this, instead of not wanting to hurt children. If you look at the Alan Walker study, there are even many of them that do not believe that they can hurt children by exposing them sexually or by being in a relationship with a child. And there are many of them that believe that children should be able to choose to be in a relationship with an adult. In that book, you will find that it calls them pro-choice pedophiles. I don't think it's a coincidence they use terminology that you're familiar with. Michael then claims he can't control himself or any of his choices that he's about to make, especially with Sarah after he kissed Heather. He was doing what he needed to do in order to get closer to Heather, which is what he had to do. It's what the fates told him. It's what he has no control over himself for. He has this undying love for her after talking to her like twice, watching her a few times at a store and kissing her once. And so now he has to go for it. On his way home, he runs into Heather at the home gate. They have a moment together and talk. She apologizes for being jealous of Sarah, knowing that Michael's true feelings are for her, and tells him that all of those girls are really out there to get him, and it's sick. She's like, I've talked to them in private. I've listened to them shit talk you, and it is amazing how many of them want to come and get you. If they are out to get him, how does he still have a job? He should not have a job. He's done enough to violate people. He's sexually harassed people at work. Madeline hates him. Why would she hold back the trigger on removing him if she's already threatening sexual assault claims? Just get rid of him. There's no reason that any of these women would still be working with him. Logically speaking, with what is presented here, none of them would. They're walking home together and end up in a park when, quote, are you going to have sex with me? She asks, her nervousness interjecting itself between her words. I mean, are we going to have sex? I'm afraid I don't have any protection, I ruefully said, leading Heather into a forest opening, content to just kiss and lightly caress her, as unbelievable as I'm sure that sounds. I don't mind, Michael. I want you. I really want you. You don't need to protect yourself. Heather, seriously, we can't. The risk is high enough as it is. I'm on my period. Oh, I mean, if that's not a problem for you, she asked, our strides coming to a stop at the desired location. No, not at all. In fact, it's even more perfect. As long as you're sure, Heather. Of course, Michael. I'm supposed to bleed the first time anyway, right? Well, yeah, that's true. Well then, it's settled. We're really going to do this. I need Michael to explain what he means by it's more perfect that she is on her period for them to have sex. Like, it's nauseating, okay? Somehow, Michael has become just the little baby sheep in this situation. So passive, so quiet, so lack of control for himself, so subdued by this little 14-year-old girl. I guess he really is just whipped. That's what he's basically... Like, this whole time when he's interacting with Heather, he's basically doing this a little woo-woo, woo-woo. when he's not dropping the feminazi bombs. Like, those are your two sides of Michael. And they go somewhere private and, quote, to my surprise, Heather initiated the removal of our clothes by unstrapping my belt, placing my firm arousal in the palm of her hand. She gazed at it for a while, lost in the image and feel, anticipating how it would soon be inside of her. I then laid her down, aroused to the point of oblivion. We soon removed the rest of our remaining clothes, despite the chill in the air, our touching goosebumps driving us rapidly into the fervor of the wild. Her slender perfection was enough to make me cry. The soft texture of her skin brought about a sense of a home I'd never known, whilst her body was everything that I'd ever fantasized about and more. Michael, don't say that you're surprised. You're not surprised. You're passive in all of this, letting this happen specifically so that you can claim that you're a victim who didn't do this when you're not. He takes her, has sex with her, determines that he's madly in love with her right then and there. Laying on the ground because, yeah, they had sex outside, he's thinking about the sex that they just had. He tells her to wake up and that they need to go because he hears a family coming along the way, and Heather begs him for more sex, so they go at it again. During the sex this time, a random 5-year-old shows up. They don't stop. They put on a show for the child and then involve that 5-year-old child. Quote, Heather then opened her left leg, revealing herself to the child in all of her indecency. Reaching to the bottom of her opening where the continuous flow of moisture departed, she slightly caresses my bloodied scrotum with her fingernails, tightening herself further around my shaft. The girl continued to stare, but I distinguished a light tremor about her lips, an uncertainty as to what she was bearing witness. Heather drew her hand back up and gazed at her now freshly blood-stained palm. As we breathed in its barren heat, something shifted in the atmosphere. I suddenly felt unable to breathe. The whole time, Heather draws the 5-year-old closer as they're continuing to go and wants to get that 5-year-old involved. Heather then comes because of the voyeuristic aspect of this. She is so sexually excited, not just by the voyeurism, but by the youth of the voyeur, the shock of the voyeurism, and the trauma on that kid's face. Heather then makes out with that 5-year-old as she orgasms, and Michael pulls out and orgasms because of Heather's pleasure. Michael then feels the need to stop the story right here and say, I don't remember if this actually happened or if this is just me like remembering it, because every time I remember this situation, it changes slightly. But he remembers Heather running her fingers through her bloodied body parts, mixing the semen and the blood together from her belly, and then pressing those fingertips to the lips of the 5-year-old. And in a different recollection, he can't remember if that actually happened, but he does remember that the girl started crying. In all of the memories that he has, Heather seemed grateful and happy about what happened. Still at the park, he's looking around thinking how they need to freaking go because the girl is screaming. There are crows watching them everywhere, so he gets dressed and they run away. They hide in the park, talk about how Heather's parents probably are worried because she didn't come home last night, and Heather's like, don't worry, Michael. They probably don't even know that I'm not there. Somehow, the two of them are not covered in blood despite what they have just done. And the messiness of it all, there is no blood on their clothing, and it's not something that even comes up in them running away. He says he then needs to get to work, so they kiss and he leaves. At work, Sarah's brought a form for Michael to sign because he's late. It's a new protocol, and he has to sign it for being late. He doesn't want to sign it and says that Sarah is not even the boss, so she needs to fuck off and, not push this protocol. Instead of signing it, he yells at Sarah that she's some kind of sexist and is gunning for a promotion, so he's not going to sign the stupid paper. And she says that he's always mansplaining, and now they're both just calling each other sexists. How is this even going to result in him not getting fired anyway? 1, they have cameras. 2, they have to clock in, so everybody knows that he's late. 3, if everybody already knows that he's late, then why isn't Rosalind, who is actually the manager, talking to Michael instead of having freaking Serafina do it? Because it's only appropriate that the actual manager in training or the manager does this. It's not a new protocol to have to sign a paper when you come in late. So this is just like bogus. This is so bogus. And then on top of that, if this is the protocol, which they can check because of your time, because of your clock in, and because of the cameras, then refusing to sign the paper for the protocol can then get you fired for insubordination. Like, there's no reason for any of this to happen, except then it goes into wish fulfillment. So it's like, you have to make me believe the circumstances if you want any of it to matter. Because none of it is following any sort of ruling, there's no point to any of this. It's just a showcase of disgust, which again, it just leads into the transgressive nature of this, where the author feels like he's trying to be disgusting. He's trying to push boundaries, which is not what Lolita was. Instead, it's this cheap shock factor of trying to be ridiculous, of trying to push boundaries in order to get a response, because the only thing that's attempted here is to be as disgusting and push as many boundaries as possible in order to get a response so that you can then be insulted for not getting it, when really this is just shitlord writing. And then some people who do this sort of thing Say, well, it got an emotional response out of you, so clearly it's artistic. Guess what? Shitting on somebody's doorstep and ringing the bell can also get a response. That does not make it a high art. That makes it you being a jackass. And don't worry, I know that some people would argue with that, and that's fine. I'm just laying out some thoughts here. After the two of them yell at each other, he finally fills out the form, and then she's super nice to him and asks if she can get him a coffee. Michael says that he won't talk to Sarah about anything personal anymore, and says that it's because Maddie went around telling everybody that he's a pedophile after she shared that information with her. He's also very sure that Sarah is attracted to him, as she says that she wants to trust him. He reminds us that despite Sarah's interest in him, he's as interested in her as a post-wall feminist with purple hair and a protest sign. So, by post-wall, it means that she is over the age in which she is attractive anymore, which is, again, like a red pill, incel, all of that sort of groupings where it gives sexual marketplace value to women. And basically it depends on who you talk to. Some people say like, oh, if you're over 20, wall. If you're over 30, wall. And then basically it just says you're useless, you're worthless, because the only thing that women have is beauty and fertility, and the younger the better is what the mindset says. Sarah apologizes to Michael for the day before and the way that she treated him. Sarah then tells Michael that Freya has admitted to having feelings for Heather, and then says that Heather laid into Freya for it because she doesn't like women. She said that she doesn't like women, and Michael is like, oh well. Michael then insinuates that it's a little weird if Heather isn't at least a little bi at this day and age, because most women, if not all women, are a little bi, but it's not impossible for women to be totally straight. He then asks if this means he's got a shot with Heather, since he is Heather's type and she likes older men. Sarah snaps at him and then throws herself into his arms and says that she is so stressed out. So it's weird because she's like, stop being such a pervert and talking about hitting on 14-year-olds. BT dubs, be my emotional support, by the way. She admits to Michael that Harry grabbed her butt the other day when the girls weren't looking. She says that she's kept that a secret from Madeline, and there's no real reason for why when they're all very concerned about predators. Mike is super excited to have this secret because now he's got a secret with Sarah, and that means something super deep. Sarah turns to Michael to continue talking to him and then kisses him. Behind her is Heather. Michael says in that moment he feels like the child at heart he has is released. Quote, I may as well have been kissing that little girl instead of Serafina. They are both one and the same. My blood turned cold, crackling like ice-covered lake under the pressure, shedding all illusions of my adulthood to reveal the hidden child underneath, broken and alone. I saw myself through the eyes of a little girl inside the grove. During this kiss, Heather attacks Sarah and takes her to the ground. Mike is so aroused that he's just watching the two of them go at each other. The fight eventually stops and the two girls walk away while Mike just stands there. Sarah calls out of work the next day, and work is quiet. The kids are all back in school, and for some reason, Mike now wants to marry Heather. He plans to ask her for marriage on her 16th birthday and confirm with the parents that it's going to be okay. Harry then comes to the cafe with a picnic-packed lunch for Maddie. He's considered a stereotype for a male feminist, and he's vegan. While Maddie is ignoring all of his efforts that he's put into this picnic, Mike wants to slap everyone. Sarah calls the shop and addresses Mike about Heather's crush and what happened outside yesterday, saying that they talked about it at her house and they fell asleep together. But when she woke up, Heather was gone and making out with Freya, and tried to make out with her at some point, so something weird is going on. Heather and Freya have now entered the bookstore. Heather looks at Mike, and he is fearful of what's happening to her, but is also insanely turned on and wants to impregnate her, like right this second. Like, he is escalating very quickly. Heather wants to have her picture taken of her and Freya doing sexual poses while Harry takes the picture, and Mike admires how much more sex appeal Heather has over Maddie and any of the feminists that he works with. Maddie asks Mike if he has a phone, and when he says no, she says, it looks like you're hiding something when you do that. He's like, dude, people on the internet talk and are so full of shit that it doesn't even matter, I just stay off the internet. And then to the woman who propagated that he's a pedo and who he says is out to get him. He says, quote, it's nice that those ripening underage girls feel so at ease around your boyfriend, isn't it, Madeline? Look at how liberated they are. Again, where's the slip? The fact that nobody is responding to him saying this is alarming, to say the least. Instead of doing anything, Maddie just says, Harry is not my boyfriend, and huffs away. Heather grabs, this again just makes it, when you're in a story and somebody says something where obviously there should be pushback, this happened in Amygdala as well, where it's like your enemy should be able to respond to you saying something stupid or saying something that they oppose, but instead they just have a cat got your tongue moment and walk away, which then gives this idea of setting up a straw man. And then when you have that situation in a book where you have full control and you set up this straw man, that's when it starts looking like you support something and you're writing a narrative that supports something. Because theoretically, Madeline should have a response for him hitting on 14-year-olds and saying 14-year-olds have sex appeal and that her boyfriend is a predator. During this moment, Heather then grabs Freya and they kiss. So at this point, then what was the point of throwing Freya under the bus when Freya said, I like you? Again, we've got the author making really terrible decisions that make no sense as to the goal of Heather if she wants to manipulate everyone around her. Why would she then say absolutely not to a female when she could have Freya in the palm of her hand because Freya has feelings for her? Like, and that was not even a scene ago. That was in this chapter where you have the call where she says Heather insulted Freya and Freya broke down crying, and then immediately this happens. Like, it was pointless. Note to the reader, there is this randomly inserted page that says a page has been ripped out of the book and the old book is worth a lot of money. Also, Michael is now invited to Heather's house on Saturday. Heavy underlines on the underage thing where it says Mike's age, Heather's age, says your underage lover basically in it. The note from the author apparently turns out to have possibly been a book actually from a published novel, maybe Worthington Heights. The torn page theoretically actually came from a copy of a real book that is worth $10,000. Michael burns the book to hide the evidence of the situation after he takes the page out. Considering how stupid Michael is, I'm not sure how he hasn't been arrested for being a nonce aside from the author's clear wish fulfillment in this book. I don't know how else to read this because he's openly going after minors. Everyone at work knows. He brags about it. He has sex with a child in a park, continuing while a 5-year-old watches. Then he goes to Heather's house, which is where we are now, and he still pretends that he has no choice in the matter, quote, essentially walking into unknown territory. I moved towards her residence as if I'd once traveled there before. It all came a second nature, despite nothing being natural in the least. I could have even been walking straight into some inescapable hole. Something kept pulling me there, however, as if I were eager to carry out my own demise, so long as Heather had willed it. Despite being convinced of her loyalty, I was remarkably opaque. And then he goes along with ranting about how he is powerless at work to women, and he is the most victimized because women and feminazis control everything. He goes into the house, asks Heather where to, and she responds, wherever you want to go, she whispered, perching her lips over my earlobe. I want you to fuck me in every single room, Michael. I started with the kitchen out back, laying Heather on an old dining table, feeling out of sorts, evaporated of all senses. No mention was made of contraceptives, no passion rendered so blind. We were just two children, the lost who have somehow found each other, and knowing the world for what it was, our defiance was spoken through our mutual recklessness, our momentous and receptacle suicidal passion. We were far more one and the same than I think she ever imagined, as I was about to find out. I worry that Heather would become basically Celeste from Tampa if she didn't die at this point, because I'm pretty sure Celeste also was sexually active at 14 and then started going after 14-year-olds. But this is something that gets me about this book specifically, this passage with our mutual recklessness, our momentous and reciprocal suicidal passion. This book constantly romanticizes and fetishizes both the underage illegality of this and suicidal / harmful nature of everything. It idealizes suicidal ideation. That's why it talks like this. It's not about her purity or her innocence or being wild about things. This is just romanticizing how terrible it is. And romanticizing the taboo, romanticizing both incest, necrophilia, and suicide. As they lay in bed after sex, smoking, they talk about how they're going to use Freya and Sarah as cover now that 14-year-old Heather has turned into some diabolical plotter, while Michael is this passive little bitch who gets snapped around by a 14-year-old. Are you gonna, fuck Serafina? She asked, suddenly plucking the cigarette from my fingers and stubbing it out into a stale fairy cake sitting on her bedside table. Well, you'll have to fuck her, I guess. She has got great tits. I bet she'll be shit in bed, though. If it bothers you, we can... It doesn't bother me. Not at all. It's a no-brainer, Michael. It'll make things far easier for you. For us. As if Freya won't see to your every need. You've got a point there. Let's just see how it goes, Heather. I can always keep Serafina waiting. You know, I'd much rather be with... Don't worry about him, Michael, she said, throwing her legs across my torso, then sitting upright, resting her hand over the headboard. She said, fuck her whenever you want. Just promise me that you'll wear a condom. If you get her pregnant, I'll kill her. My mom's an insomniac freak, so I've got the meds to get the job done nice and easy. As they plot, you get this piece of literature. Good. She nestled her hairless nether regions gently over my mouth, then moaned as she pressed down hard and dug her fingernails into the wood of the headboard. I shoveled my tongue between the delicate lips of her immaculate cunt. Every huff, moan, or breath she exhaled sat eternally on the haunted outskirts of an orgasm, constantly rippling through her tightening muscles as it jolted her closer, dispersing youthful moisture in the cutest streams imaginable. I swallowed every ounce of her I could. Heather was the death of sex. There was no coming back from her. I realize that this author is a shitlord, and obviously what he's doing is shitlordery, which it seems like most people who choose to write pedophilia want to get a reaction out of you. And you know what? Do what you want to do, but it's honestly disgusting, stupid, and frankly low IQ and insulting that your go-to to elicit a reaction is writing a pedophile's perspective and rape. Their further discussion and sex is interrupted by Freya standing in the door. Mike climbs under the bed to hide while Heather goes and lets Freya in the front. She's explaining about Sarah being overbearing, and as they're talking back and forth about Sarah, Mike listens from under the bed and starts getting hard. He's like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be a long night, as his erection just stares him in the face, hitting into the bottom of the bed. And Mike is afraid that he is so hard and he is like so leaky that they are going to smell his cum and find him. Quote, my desperation to climax had reached Sisyphean absurdity, but I feared the stink of such a release would make the celestial beings aware of the masculine presence in the room, so I somehow resisted the urge in spite of the lunacy it was spawning. Then you've got the two 14-year-olds acting out a porno, with Heather getting Freya to say, quote, I want you to touch my pussy, and quote, oh Freya, you want me to touch your little wet cunt? So they get really sexual, led by Heather, as Heather again takes over and says that they can do things all night, and then they keep going as Mike sort of blacks out, or tries not to black out as he listens. 3 hours later, and they're still going at it. Heather is asking Freya what she thinks about Harry, and Heather uses this as her in to start harassing Freya about, didn't you say that you wondered what it'd be like to fuck a guy as long as you didn't have to see him while he does it? Well, let me help you with that by making a threesome happen. And Heather calls Madeline, quote, a fucking feminazi in teddy bear clothing, making Mike proud. Heather says that she's gonna go and call Harry over for the threesome, and Mike is like, hee. So then he is also into little girls, despite all the feminazi indoctrination he's probably gotten into. Wow. Heather brings Freya alcohol for prep and is then licking up the spilled alcohol as Heather says, I need a little pee-pee, and she excuses herself. And once she comes back, she tells Mike to come out from under the bed and tells him to be quiet. Apparently, like most existentially transgressive writers writing pedophilia and necrophilia, you get a description of Heather making a hentai face, and I'm not even joking. Then Heather is making this all happen as she drags Mike around and gets him more horny, then pulls him into the other room where Freya is tied to the bedposts and blindfolded. Heather says that Harry is here, planning to use Mike as Harry to get the deed done. Against Freya's protest, Heather says that she's going to tell Harry what to do, and since he's a feminist, he'll listen. As she says this, she's touching Mike and guiding his dick. As he obeys the whole time, he continues to say that he has no control over himself, and Heather is now out of control. Quote, she was wild and rapid, maybe a little too wild and rapid. Something in her eyes has gone missing. Until then, I hadn't thought that I might have awoken some sort of nymphomaniac. It's so pathetic. This 35-year-old man goes, I am at the behest and mercy of this 14-year-old. There is no way that this could have been any different because I don't have autonomy. And you have to wonder, like, I would leave this as the character if it weren't for watching his video, which was not fiction at all, where he says that men are whipped by the pussy. And so women are always in control, and that women are psychopaths that just try to control you. So, like, I'm trying to gauge how much of the story is specifically inspired by the views of the author, and how much is him embodying a character that does not have his views. That I'm very interested in your guys' interpretations of this information. Going forward, Heather gets Mike to rail into Freya, and Heather mutters sorry into Mike's ear before pulling the blindfold off of Freya. Freya obviously screams, seeing a picture of what she was not expecting to see on the other side of that blindfold. Freya eventually passes out while she is screaming, and Heather is like, lol, just finish and do what you want to do to her. Mike gets mad about what Heather did, and it sounds like he wants to strangle her, though she slipped away. Mike tosses Freya aside, ragdoll. She falls onto the floor and is completely unresponsive. Mike wonders if Heather has always wanted to kill Freya, and as he steps over her, he steps on her ankle, and she still does not respond, does not wake up. Something is wrong. But, you know, Mike doesn't stop, doesn't check, doesn't whatever. He just chases after Heather, finds her hiding under a bed, but the sleepiness is coming to get him. Drugged, he passes out. When he wakes up, There's a crow looking at him. Then it screams, and there are a bunch of crows circling outside of a window. He's still looking for Heather, and he thinks that he's gone crazy. He follows the birds to the window, fearful of what he might see. Freya is on the ground outside of the window, dead and twisted up on the pavement. Mike assesses that she was probably pushed in a violent altercation that she lost. There are also a couple of dead crows laying on the ground around her. Then he finds sleeping pills scattered across the house floor that lead into various bedrooms. They look like they were purposefully scattered across the floor. Mike finds Heather's phone on the floor, and there's a picture flashing across the screen that's Serafina from the cafe as she is trying to call Heather. Apparently, this is the fourth time that Sarah has tried to call, and that worries him that something might have happened to Heather. He keeps walking around the house calling for Heather, and she's laying on her parents' bed. He believes at the time that what he must do is kill her because of what happened. There's no way out of this situation. Well, how quickly have we gone from freaking I need to marry her to I need to kill her? This does not make me feel very comfortable about, having a stalker of my own that is this kind of obsessed. As he wraps his hands around her throat to kill her, he confirms that she is actually dead and is cold enough that she's probably been dead for a couple of hours. As you might have guessed where this is going, Mike determines that he needs to have sex with the corpse, have one final moment of bringing Heather back to life via sex with her body. Her phone is still ringing. While with the corpse, Mike says he knew that having sex with Heather would ruin him and wonders how many other people have had sex with child corpses. He describes it and is confusing himself with her still being alive. During the sex, she starts going into rigor mortis and he feels it, bites her shoulder, sucks on the blood, eats a chunk of her skin because this book is trying so hard to be edgy at this point. Then Serafina is calling again, and Mike answers the phone once he's finished inside of Heather. Sarah's on the other side of the line crying because she was apparently sent pictures of Harry having sex with Freya. And she's like, was he really with my sister? Why did you send me those pictures? And she assumes that Heather sent those pictures as a cry for help, that she is in a desperate situation and needs out. Mike is realizing the gravity of the situation with, quote, I can't lie. The tiniest semblance of me sensed the initial relief such a revelation would bring, until I saw myself, maybe for the first time that morning, lying on top of a body of a dead teenage girl. A dead teenage girl that I had sex with, taken a bite out of, and eaten raw. I sobbed like a baby with her breast in my mouth. There was no choice. I was going to have to commit suicide, just like I'd been planning, just before Heather walked into my life. I wish, we'd actually seen him considering freaking suicide before Heather walked into his life, because that's just randomly thrown in there. He looks through Heather's phone to see just how many pictures Heather has and how much of this whole thing was set up. Apparently, she had already been talking to Harry as well and thought that he was actually going to come over to do the do with Freya. However, she eventually thought that, oh, well, he's not coming at all, and so she used Mike as a replacement. Quote, clearly she wanted to make me listen to him having sex with her, is where Mike ends up on that. In the messages, you also see Heather had threatened to kill herself if Harry didn't come over. And he also hates Heather for leaving him with all of this guilt of what's happened and that she gets to escape into death. So we're supposed to believe that Mike didn't black out and strangle her and kill her and then walk away in a delusional state, but instead that she killed herself. I'm going to guess that Mike blacked out and killed her and then came back after having a rage and also threw Freya out the window in his own rage as well, because he's screwed. He knows that he's screwed. Also, he's not actually going to kill himself. He has the opportune moment to throw himself out the window and kill himself, and instead he just suicide ideations the whole time. Mike is such a little pathetic person that blames everybody else for his circumstances while saying that he is the biggest victim. Now, as Mike is standing in the house, you have Harry banging on the door, trying to get attention. Weird that he's not even being quiet or subtle as he's banging about the noncing that he wants to do. I guess no one really does care in this world because the neighbors aren't going to say anything as he's calling out to bang Heather to open the door. Mike scrolls through the pictures on the phone and sees some of them with Heather having sex with Harry. Meanwhile, Harry is a drunk fool out there knocking on the door saying, come open the door, baby. I got the drugs that you like. Come and do it. But then it all goes quiet as Harry starts walking around the house. Mike goes to the window to see Mike creeping around the house to try to find a way in, when he also sees Sarah's car coming down the street. And she's also in her nightie, he notices. And when she sees Harry in the yard, she slams into him with the car. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, Mike again pauses to talk about how artistic and beautiful it is, just admiring his own hand in painting this thing because he thinks it is an epic odyssey, tragic, whatever this thing is. And it's just like, Look at my beautiful art. Then Sarah jumps out of the car and runs over to Freya's body on the ground as Micah is thinking about how pornographic she looks in doing this. There's just something pornographic about this older woman trying to help this younger woman. And by older, I mean Seraphina's only 18, but whatever. And then we kind of get Mike putting on his clothes instead of jumping out the window to kill himself as he said he was going to do, which Mike, follow through with something. Would you have some autonomy here? Throw yourself out the window, end it all. Instead, we switch over to him actually standing over Freya's body in the hospital, because this whole story has been him telling Freya the story of how this all happened. And she's still alive. Mike is saying how he was afraid of Sarah getting him in trouble all over this, since she was the one to start the rumors in the first place about him sleeping with a child. And they're not really rumors, okay? Because he confirmed he did sleep with a child. He says that Heather awakened hope in him and, quote, I cannot lie. I wanted her to. My God, how I had practically begged, put faith and feelings over logic, chance over reason, hope, the worst, most fatalistic and damaging of all wretched emotions we're cursed with. Hope, the cancerous inception behind all abject delusions, cowardly dreams that never know of fruition, and ambitious reveries that only ever see the light of day within the shadows of disappointment. Heather only brought back my broken delusions to have them ridiculed and mocked and torn into pieces again. Even that, I'll bet, wasn't enough. And do you want to know the most pathetic thing? Do it all over again in a heartbeat. That's the brutality of it all. That's why I defiled her corpse, her wretched, perfect cadaver. And do you know what? I'd do that again, too. Even now, my God, what I'd do to fuck her with impunity one more time. And yet, I'd also still forgive her. He thinks he is such a tragic person. So Freya's in a coma, and meanwhile, as he says this, he also can't help but insult Freya because all women suck. Quote, that I'm not suspicious of this vegetative state that you find yourself in now. This preposterous and convenient comatose excuse that you now possess to perpetuate your already everlasting victimhood. I know that you can fucking hear me, Freya. Do you get that? Nobody else might, but I fucking do. This in and out, conscious yet unconscious, awake yet unresponsive condition of yours might have all those cunts out there fooled, but you won't pull the wool over my eyes. Do you know that? Is that sinking in? But even with all of the reasons I have for killing you, I can't. He says that he can't kill her because he plans to bring Heather back anew through that body. He also talks about how he tried to skip town and would have lied about it being a family emergency. And then if anybody asked about his family, he would have said that his aunt had molested him, because who makes that kind of stuff up, right? Then he talks about how Harry is also still alive despite being run over by Sarah's car, but he's under constant surveillance because everybody thinks that he was raping these people and killed these people. All the pictures on Heather's phone showed connections with Harry, and there were none with Michael, so the cops never looked any further and just sort of assumed that Harry was to blame for all of this. He also feels bad that he never told Heather about Sarah being a decoy sooner. Maddie apparently also tried to kill herself because, quote, her well-cucked and progressive on and off boyfriend was fucking underage girls, and he thinks that the suicide attempt was fake and just done for attention because of course it was, since everyone in this book is insincere, but especially the women. Quote, I'm fairly certain that her effort was half-hearted though. More of a cry for attention suicide than anything else. A way to counteract and distract from the fact, the reality that she'd slept with a predator out of her own volition. You know that kind of thing. A form of dungaree damage control. I'm amazed that she didn't throw a little Me Too party also. I bet that she even pursued him, knowing her. In fact, it really wouldn't surprise me if she knew that he was a pedophile this whole time. She knew all about it and she liked it. It makes perfect sense as to why her reaction was so extreme, especially when you really think about it. At least Heather's self-exit was methodically premeditated. She knew those barbitures of her mother's, if taken in high enough doses along with alcohol and an open window room during winter, would be enough to end everything. Madeline just took a load of pills from the bathroom cabinet completely nonsensically without rhyme or reason. Pathetic, really. Some people will go to the ends of the earth just to avoid culpability, but above and fucking beyond for the faintest shred of sympathy. My word, I am so repulsed to be a part of this species, so irreclaimable unblameably ashamed. And the fact that she was trying to protect her victimhood status after Heather had died and ended up here, Freya, as a vegetable no less, disgusts me beyond all measure. I hope that she makes another, more thought-out attempt to end herself next time. I really do. Still, the Dungaree Club has fallen, unwoven itself, and fallen apart at the seams, it seems. Ha ha! At least that's some consolation. You want to know how I know all of this about Madeline? Serafina told me about it after she saw the pedo-loving slut posting about it online. How reprehensible can a person be these days? It doesn't go past me that obviously he's saying this about Madeline because Serafina knows that Michael was pursuing children and into children and is willfully dating him or being around him and defended him against the police for some reason. Closing, the book also has Michael in the hospital. He is not under surveillance. He is not under suspicion. Obviously, Sarah has covered everything for him, and he says that he is going to use Freya to bring Heather back to life. Death will not keep them apart, and the coma was obviously done in order to rebirth Heather. And that's that. So now you can see where my issue is with the beginning chapters, talking about how this is like trying to present it as if he's not talking to Freya and as if he's talking to some third party, but it's actually Freya who's been a part of it. And I don't know why that was not fixed in order to meet with where it's at the end, especially with where it ends, because he's not talking to some other person based on how this is laid out. I also think that the language attempted to copy what Lolita is written like, but it is much harder for me to buy into because of the time period and the location of this book. British people don't really talk like this as far as I understand, but you know, I'm not British, so maybe they do actually talk like this. But the way that this is written makes it feel like the character thinks that he is way smarter than he is, that the writing is way smarter than it is, and he's really just an idiot pretending to be smart. With the way that he talks and has an ego about it. On the unreliability of the narrator, because we know that he's lying. What he's lying about, we don't really fully know what exactly he is lying about. I liked the idea of him assuming everybody against him was some sort of political opposite that obviously did not meet his worldview, because that makes sense from an unreliable narrator standpoint, speaking of explicit versus implicit and trying to figure things out, the lies that a character tells, because a character is never going to tell you when they are actually lying, as I talked about in my video on Saturday. But when all of the women verbally confirm that they are feminists, then it is no longer just his mental projection. It is actually the characters affirming that. And yeah, a character can be delusional and also make up situations. But if the entire book is a lie, then the entire book is also a lie. It did not set the book up to look that way, though. Then there are things throughout this book that feel like the author has self-inserted and done political opinions to demonize, especially when you have somebody that is so obsessed with existentialism, with this idea that everything is worthless, that there is no purpose to life. That is one of my gripes with the existentialists, period, is it's always so extreme because they don't live for anything. You get into a zone of it is more difficult to tell where the author starts and where the character starts when you have the character saying things that the author also says word for word, or ideas that the author says word for word, and the character is treated like a victim in the same way that the author talks about victimization in a nonfiction setting. And that has to do with the feminist agenda, or with how demonized men are, or how demonized all men are, or how powerless all men are against women, and how women are always constantly in power, period. And then you've got phrases like, quote, with Madeline snooping around, another fat woke obstacle in and of itself, peering through the scope of our feminazi agenda, I had in my possession an inadvertent ally. So like, is it a character? Is it not a character? That's where it gets difficult when you start looking at the nonfiction and you start looking at the intent of the author, is where was the author started. Now, I remember looking at reviews of this some time ago, and even if I say that this is all just a character, and so whatever, it's a despicable character, what is actually concerning is looking at reviews where reviewers say, but Michael's got a point, because that tells you certain things. As I read this, I was thinking of the interesting dynamic or difference between this and Tampa by Alyssa Nutting, where in this, the guy said that he was totally in love with her, thinking of marriage, thinking of impregnation, wanting that person in his life. I don't know if he actually did, because the idea of marriage got lost very quickly, pretty much just as quickly as it came up. However, in Alyssa Nutting's book, it was just the focus of treating people as objects. And if you look at Heather, the character, then she kind of already acts like Celeste treats little boys in Tampa, in seeing everyone in this book as a tool, though it seems like it's less for sexual obsession and more as a method of manipulation, because At 14, Heather is already going through her own existential crisis because her parents are absent. Mixed into the prose, where it doesn't really try, we have things like Madeline said, tone cunty. It just made me think of some of the other poorly written stories I've read where it's the person had a bitchy tone of voice. It's just like, you know, try to sound smart and then just drop into tone cunty, which also, it's not lost on me that transgressive writers like to use the word cunt specifically because, again, it's another word that's meant to trigger a reaction out of people, which, again, weak writing. Now, my bigger comment on this in general has to do with the fact that it compares itself to Lolita. When you get into any book, you have to think, what is the story trying to say? What is the author trying to say? You're never going to have a straightforward answer because that's just the nature of how art works. That's the nature of how stories work. Sometimes the author will tell you what the question is before it even starts. Like the theme of X book is redemption. And then it's up to you to go through the journey and then see if that journey justifies the answer to the question, if it's yes or no. Or if you disagree with the prescriptions of the journey and the question. When you look into the original Lolita, what is that story about? Obviously, since it's artwork, there are different interpretations involved. There are many great video essays on the topic here on YouTube with people who have done deep dives into Lolita and the author, my understanding of it, and feel free to talk about it in the discussions. I invite the discussion of different perspectives on it, especially because I think this is where it really comes, where the book discussion really shines. So my understanding of Lolita is that it shows a selfish monster who will go to great lengths and destroy anything he touches, attempting to manipulate anyone, including the reader, in order to achieve the object of his affection, whether that affection is justified or twisted. This ultimately also results in the destruction of the object of his affection because his desire is destructive as at the beginning, because the desire that he has is destructive by default. Ultimately, the selfish actions of Humbert Humbert result in tragedies of everyone around him, especially the object that he wanted. Some people even theorize that the author of Lolita was raped as a child, and Lolita was a way of expressing that trauma and what happened because of the trauma. Meanwhile, what does this book have to say? As it says, it is like Lolita. It is inspired by Lolita. It is the author's retake of Lolita. I think that it falls into a category like The Stars We Steal, where it attempts to do a retelling of a classic without fully understanding what's being said in that book, or it's inspired by, without understanding the homework. So instead of writing something meaningful and comparable, it ends up copying the most superficial aspects, the style and the main character being a predator. What this book ends up doing is actually attempting to make the 35-year-old man a victim of the 14-year-old girl and every female around him. It's actually the entire opposite of what Lolita was trying to show. And in that way, it perverts what Lolita was meant to do. Continuously throughout the book, they mock him for openly hitting on children, but do nothing to stop it, which is a really weird take because then it provides the context that everyone in this world condones this sexual behavior. They just kind of look at it as if it's as gross as a 50-year-old man dating a 25-year-old girl rather than a 35-year-old man preying on a 14-year-old. It turns Michael into this passive agent where continuously he says that he is only controlled and that a 14-year-old girl is no different than an 18-year-old, a 22-year-old, and then whatever it was freaking Rosalind was, 24, 25, 26. She was the manager in training that was only mentioned in passing but never actually on screen, where he should have actually been talked to. He should have freaking had Rosalind waiting for him with the slip to sign the freaking slip, not Serafina. But that just feels like the author being lazy, not wanting to develop another character. When you lean into the idea of existentialism, which this book seems to lean into, then you are only your nature. You have no control over what's going to happen to you, and your choices aren't your own to make. The book copies the form of a confessional. It copies the unreliable narrator while beating you over the head with the fact it's an unreliable narrator because it also doesn't think that you're smart enough to catch on to that, and it doesn't do it in a way where it's like, just trust me, bro, just go with me. I think some of the lies and the fact that it's lying to you is very obvious, but that's also where it fails. Humbert Humbert tried to convince you to see things how he did. Michael says that you're the same as him if you read this book or listen to this tale. But he also wants to demonize every single woman in this book, which then crosses into the line of, is this a political statement saying that all men are sleazebags? Because you have to focus on the male feminist being a bad man, and then this, whatever it is, also being a bad man, as he throws around words like fascist and bourgeoisie and feminist feminazi against everyone that he believes is victimizing him, including him just having a job. Are you saying that incels are predators just as much as the pretty boy feminists, or that all men are, as every single male character introduced in this book leers at or pursues women in a very creepy manner? And that includes a couple of teenage boys at the park that see Heather post-coital, probably covered in blood, as she walks with Michael away from the park afterwards. Like, they all have a sexual thing for this girl. The perspective is a depressing one, that everybody sucks, which I think is a far cry from the themes of Lolita and is closer to the themes of the author inserted based on his own perspective. Tampa also wanted to call itself the female version of Lolita while also ignoring everything that Lolita was, which was showing the tragedy that followed selfish pursuits. There was no focus on the examination or expression of what happened to the children in Tampa, which is ultimately where it excessively fails. If you want to tell me that Tampa succeeded in that because it showed that the children don't matter since they weren't covered at all in the story, it failed. Because what you actually did is completely ignore what the focus of Lolita was, and then now you're making an excuse in post to say, well, it needed all 300 of those pages to just have Celeste be overly sexual, and that's a message in itself. No, we got that. You just failed. Ultimately, so far what I've got, what it means when they say they wrote a version of Lolita, it's got nothing in common. It has nothing to do but a pedophile POV or a predator POV focusing on teenagers and children. So aligning it with Lolita, they pretend that it's on the same level when the themes and purpose and the questions aren't nearly the same. And that's also just going to happen when an author enters into writing a story with a completely different perspective. But don't hide behind Lolita to write your politically charged erotica or comment on the state of men. The actual continually presented theme in this book is that Michael has no control over anything, which again kind of falls in line with this existential idea that we are only animals and it's a Sam Fenna variant. He is a victim to a teenage girl. He is a victim to all women at work. He is a victim to the feminazis who control everything and he should kill himself. He is a victim to Harry. And even now he chooses to go to Heather's house. He still says, I have no control of myself. I am controlled by the pussy. Where Lolita shows the destruction of selfishness through a pedophilic touch, this is saying how the pedophile has no control. Not only that, but it also tries to align the plight with society being against all men because he wants you to feel sorry for his victimhood. And there's even the appeal in there too, isn't my case the most sad case of victimhood out there because I have to live with this? So it's constantly saying, ignore the others are all victimizers and I am the victim. That is my review or discussion on the book Heather by G.C. McKay. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Have you read this book? Will you read this book? What do you think the themes are? How do you think it compares to Lolita if you've read Lolita? Do you think that it is just shock content? Because that's more or less what I see, and I'm kind of sick of the shock content. The two freaking types. And this isn't saying that you can't do it. You can do it tastefully. You can do it in a way that makes sense. The two things that I'm sick of are the people being transgressive by writing pedophilic perspectives and the horror writers that put rape in everything because they think suddenly that takes them next level. You're a trope if those are what you rely on without any depth or any thought deeper into the story and the characters as to why you're making those decisions. It's not fun. It's not cool. It's cheap. With that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Have a great week, and don't die.
The only people who should come are those who want to meet their monsters.
If this is what Agatha wants, I don't know how we can even dispute it.
I change lives, baby.
And I end them. Sweetheart, no bargains hold. Only fools know restraint.
Only losers lose!
I've been under the knife so many times, I'm practically immune to it.
If your scissors are dull, may I recommend sharpening them with leather?
I think I hit you.
Mimol says I must have a guardian angel.
To enter the ring but abstain from playing is suicidal. Your virtue makes you nothing but a liability.
You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die.